Today we're talking about pruning fig trees, and I'm going to divide this video into three sections. The first one is why to prune, followed by when to prune, and lastly how to prune. If you're only interested in some of that content, feel free to skip along in the video to that relevant section. So let's start with why we prune. The primary reason is to achieve a certain tree shape. You may prefer certain shapes aesthetically and choose to form the tree to achieve that desired look. For me, I prefer the single trunk, more open center look to my trees, and I will prune it to have that shape. Next, you also may have some space constraints in your yard, and you need to manage the tree size to fit that allotted space. The following reason is probably most important, and that's so the fruit production is within reach. Keep in mind, most of the production you get off a fig tree is going to form on the new growth in the current season. So if your tree is already very large, that new growth may be fairly high off the ground, and that makes it difficult for you to reach and of course harvest, but it also makes it harder to protect it from pests. So whether you have birds, squirrels, raccoons, whatever's in your area, it might get to it before you do. As a best practice, I would recommend trimming fig trees lower to the ground so that the new production is within reach, and then you're going to have a lot easier time managing the fruit on it, both protecting and harvesting. A related reason to the fruit production is also making sure that you have good sunlight penetration within the tree. You want to make sure the sun is able to hit every branch and every leaf within the tree, and the open center concept that I was mentioning earlier is a way of achieving that. Now, aesthetics aside, there also may be reasons to prune for health of the tree. So for example, if you have dead branches, you may want to trim those off. Similarly, if you have diseased branches, you want to mitigate those before the disease spreads to other parts of the tree. And finally, if you see some branches that are either rubbing or about to grow into one another and will be rubbing fairly soon, those are opportunities for disease to get into the tree. So you want to make sure you mitigate those ahead of time by cutting one of the rubbing branches off. All right, so those are some of the primary reasons you want to prune a fig tree. Next, let's talk about when to prune trees. Realistically, you can prune your trees at any point during the year, but the best time is during the dormancy period. With falling temperatures in the fall, figs are going to drop all their leaves and go dormant, and they'll essentially be asleep until the spring, at which point they wake up and start pushing new growth. Exactly when they go dormant and when they wake up is going to vary based on your climate, but at any point during that time is a great time to prune. For me personally, I prefer to do my pruning towards the end of the dormancy period. The reasoning being is that I have quite a few trees and I like to take cuttings for propagation, and doing so later in the dormancy period allows them to spend less time in my fridge. There may be other considerations in your area. For example, very cold temperatures may kill off some of the wood, so you may want to get to pruning sooner. If you are harvesting cuttings off your trees though, make sure you keep an eye on the buds. You want to catch them before they break bud, so if you see them swelling, changing, that would be a good time to get to them for pruning. All right, finally let's talk about how to prune. It really starts with getting the right tools for the job. Here I have a set of bypass hand pruners, and these are perfect for your smaller branches, say up to the thickness of your thumb. If you need to cut thicker wood, you'll want to use loppers. Here I have a pair of bypass loppers that are great for branch thicknesses between maybe 1.5 inches, maybe up to 2 inches of thickness for some of the more quality models. And if you still have thicker branches to cut through, then you'll want to use a pruning saw like the one I have here. With it, I'm able to saw through even the thickest branches. Once you have your tools, you'll want to make sure that they stay sharp, and you also want to make sure they stay clean. In fact, it's a great idea to clean the edges in between different plants so you don't spread disease between different trees. When it comes to actually making cuts, it doesn't matter how complicated your tree is, you're essentially going to be making one of three choices. The first one's the easiest, and that's, I like this branch, it's growing in the right direction, it doesn't need to be shortened, I'm just going to leave it alone. Super easy, right? The second choice you can make is, I need to remove this entire branch. And that could happen, for example, if it's rubbing up against another one, if it's growing too low, something along those lines. In that case, you want to follow the branch to the base where it branches out, and you want to locate this area that's called a collar. That's going to be a slightly wider part of the branch at its base, and then look for where that collar narrows. That's where you want to make a cut. So right after that collar ends, and that'll allow the tree to heal back the best. The third choice you can make is cutting along the branch. Cutting along a branch requires the most consideration. So let's take a closer look at how that works next to one of my in-ground trees. I'm holding a branch that has many pronounced buds or nodes along it. And you can see one here, one there, etc. The tree's natural tendency will be to push the most energy and growth out of this topmost or apical bud, and it would grow in that direction that the bud is pointing in. If that apical bud is removed, let's say by cutting the branch here, the next most likely place that will get growth is the bud directly beneath the cut. So for example, this one, which would grow in that direction. After that, the next most likely place to get growth is the bud beneath it, which would grow in that direction. So when you're cutting along the branch, you're essentially selecting for which bud you'd like to get growth from, and therefore choosing the direction and shape of that branch. So if I was to be pruning this, I would most likely want to select for a bud that's facing outward, say this one. So I would make a cut above it to get the best likelihood of getting growth in that direction. Now, please consider that you don't want to cut immediately after the bud, because there may be some dieback and you may lose it in that process. So maybe cut 1/4 to 1/2 inch above, just to make sure that you allow for some dieback and still preserve the bud. Not all buds are going to be as pronounced as you saw on that branch. If I go further up, you can see that they're a little more difficult to identify. But essentially what you can look for is the leaf scar, and typically the bud will be right above it. The leaf scar is this little divot where a leaf used to be. So you can use that to help you identify less pronounced places to cut. All right, now that we've discussed the 3 choices you can make with each cut, let's take a look at some concrete examples of pruning. I have a first-year tree here and a tree that looks like most of my second-year trees. Although these are simplistic examples, the choices that we've discussed are really applicable to all complexities of trees. For my first-year trees, I want to train them into this open center framework. Now, that's my preference. There is no right answer. You can do what suits you. To get this sort of look, I will want to make a cut along the main stem that's about the height of my hip. So I'm going to do that here, and I'm going to cut a little above the bud. All right, there's that. I know it doesn't look like much, but in a year, this tree will start getting this sort of shape. Now for second-year trees, you can see that we've already established these scaffolding branches, and I want to encourage them to keep growing out. As you can see, this particular tree has more of a vertical habit. So I'm going to make cuts, selecting for buds that point out, and this looks like a good spot here. And then for this branch, I'm going to find a similar place. I'm going to select a bud that's going this way. And then lastly, I want to cut this branch so that it grows in this direction. So I'm going to select for a bud that's over here. When I'm doing this, I want to make sure that the relative height of all the branches remains the same, such that no particular branch gains too much dominance over the others. All right, that concludes this video. I hope you found this information useful. Keep in mind, some of this is just my personal preferences. If you like a different shape to your trees, then by all means do that. Thank you for watching.